Good afternoon. I am Dr. Jeremy Tan. I was assigned to give a lecture on you guys on fluids and electrolytes for your surgery 2A. This was supposed to be last week, but Dr. Bernal went ahead with his coagulation lecture. Um, First of all, this is a very rather difficult topic, and it needs more on memorization and for you guys, but hopefully this lecture would make it easier, and I will also try to teach you on how to answer questions or usual questions about fluids and electrolytes during your exams. Just take note, okay? Ayaw mag-next. Wait. Okay, before we start talking about other things about fluids and electrolytes, we need to know the total body water we have as humans, as for your patients. Okay, total body water is 50 to 60% of your total body weight. It is usually constant, but it reflects the amount of body fat you have. Water content is greater in lean tissues such as muscle and solid organs compared to fat and bone. That's why males who have more lean muscle have 60% total body water of total body weight, and females have 50%. For obese patients, this percentage is adjusted downwards by 10 to 20% and adjusted upward for 10% for malnourished individuals. So a male obese patient will have 40 to 50% total body water, while a malnourished male would have 70% total body water. The highest percentage of total body water is seen in newborns, which is 80%, and decreases to 65% by 1 year old, and by 2 year old, it is already at the constant. Males have 60 and females have 50%. There are three functional compartments, so your 60% is divided further. Extracellular fluid is 20%, and intracellular fluid, as we all know from your physiology classes, wherein there's a lot of fluid inside the cells, consists of 40% of your total body weight. Okay? So, furthermore, the extracellular fluid can also be divided into plasma and extravascular interstitial fluid by 5 and 15% respectively. Okay? So, knowing that, this is a sample computation of a male 70 kilogram average male. Okay. The total percentage of flu water is 42 liters or 42,000 milliliters because that's 60% of 70. And it could be broken down as this. Total extracellular volume, which is 20%, is 14 liters, divided as plasma is 3.5 liters, and interstitial fluid is 10.5 liters. Intracellular volume, it's 40% of your 70 kilograms, is 28 liters. Okay? So, sabi ko nga, this topic would be rather boring and very technical. However, these are the usual questions that we give or we see for fluid and electrolyte questions. So what is the total body water of an average young adult female with a total body weight of 60 kilograms? So anybody can answer. We'll go back a few slides. Females have 50% total body water of their total body weight.
The 30 po. B.
Okay, thank you. So the answer is 30 because females have 50%. Okay? Variations to this would be the gender of the patient. You could ask what is the total body water of an average young adult male, which you would then compute as 60% or 36 liters. Okay, so don't be trapped in those kinds of questions. Just look for the gender, look for the weight, and also if the description is average or obese or malnourished. For this question, what do you think is the answer? What is the total body water of an average young adult male with a total body weight of 80 kilograms?
Doc, 48 po ba?
48. Okay, thank you. 48 is the correct answer because that's 60%. So what is the total body water of an average 1-year-old male? You will have those choices: 65, 70, 75, and 80. If you guys want to go back, oh, okay, sorry. Keynote closed unexpectedly. So what is the total body water of an average 1-year-old male? Okay, going back. So we would know that details are important because the highest total body water, as I said, for newborns is 80% and it decreases by 65% by 1-year-old. Okay? So a variation to this question is what is the total body water of an average newborn, or what is the total body water of a 3-kilogram newborn or a 5-kilogram 1-year-old male. That would require computation. Okay? If a 70-kilogram male patient has a total body water of 42 liters, how much of this is found intracellularly? Anyone?
Doc, D po. 28 liters.
Okay. So correct, right? Because intracellular fluid is 40%. So yun. So with those concepts, we now get to have answers to these questions. These are usual questions in fluid and electrolytes exams. Not just now, but also for your medicine classes in third year, nephrology, physio, this was asked, and also other subjects like pedia during your second year. So a 32-year-old male patient is significantly malnourished due to metastatic lung cancer. If the patient presently has a total body weight of 50 kilograms, what is his total body water?
Three, 30,
Okay.
30.
Actually, no, but it's 35 because we increase the percentage when the patient is malnourished because the patient would no longer have fat stores, as I said earlier, because fat tissue just contains lipids and usually hydrophobic material. No, that's why we increase by 10% of total body water for malnourished. The increase in weight They decrease in weight, but they increase in total body water because they have more muscle rather than fat. But if your patient is obese, you decrease the percentage of 60% by 10 to 20%. Okay? So composition of your fluid compartments, not just your fluid compartments not only contain water, it contains solutes such as anions and cations, so that there is exchange in plasma, exchange in concentration by osmolarity, and also by your sodium-potassium pumps. Extracellular fluid is maintained by sodium, which is your principal cation, chloride, your principal anion, and your bicarbonate, which is a principal duovalent anion. For your intracellular fluid, you have potassium, which is the principal cation, and magnesium, phosphate, sulfate, and other proteins. Okay? This is also very familiar to you because this was also taught in physiology. Sodium is outside, potassium is inside. Sabi nga ni Doc Barbon, piso, di ba? Piso. Potassium inside, sodium outside. Okay, this is the distribution intracellularly. So if you add plasma and interstitial fluid, you will see that sodium is the dominant electrolyte outside, and water follows sodium whenever possible with osmosis. Relative percent, and isotonic, which means it has the same amount of sodium as that of your blood to maintain the fluid distribution on your body. Okay? Common questions, again, what is the principal cation of the extracellular fluid compartment? So sa loob.
Doc, potassium po.
Okay. Okay. Huwag kayong masyadong matakot na sa sagot. Kakasabi lang eh. Pero okay lang yun. Okay lang naman magkamali. No? Pero yun, potassium yung sagot. Okay? So, there are changes in our body fluid that happens daily and normally. It happens on all normal individuals. So, we intake 2 liters of water per day, 75% from oral, 25% water derived from solid foods, eaten orally also. And there is daily water loss. Okay, we lose 800 to 1,200 ml of urine. It also clears products of metabolism, such as your electrolytes and others. Okay, you lose 250 ml in stool. You lose 600 ml through insensible losses. Insensible because you don't feel them. You just lose 75% of water through your skin and 25% of water through your lungs. Loss because you lose a lot of water from your lungs when you exhale. And also fever because of your shivering and hypermetabolism because of your losses in your skin. Sensible water loss, you feel the water loss, but it doesn't happen as defecation or urinating. You lose water by sweating. When you lose water by sweating, that is usually hypotonic. No electrolytes or few electrolytes go with the water while sweating. And you have some loss of GI fluids, gastrointestinal fluids, which we will discuss later. So aside from water intake, you also have electrolyte intake as perceived with your dietary salt. You intake 3 to 5 grams of dietary salt per day, and it is balanced by the kidneys. Okay? The kidney can release 1 milliequivalent to 5,000 milliequivalents per day of your electrolytes. Okay, this is an important table. Again, we cannot do anything but memorize these things because these are standards. And this should be common knowledge to all doctors. Okay, so using this table, we can answer the following questions. How much is the average water loss per day of a 60 kilogram male through urine and stool? So kung masyadong mabilis, let's look at the table. Let's add urine, 800 to 1,500, and stool, which is 0 to 250. So you add 800 with 0 and 15 to 250, you end up with an answer of 800 to 1,750, right? Because these are computations for 60 to 80 kilogram male patients. Okay, you end up with 800 to 1,750, which is the answer to this question, which we can answer if we study that table. Other questions that can be done, variations, if you would encounter them in your exam, what is the maximal loss, right, from urine per day, which is 1,400 per hour, or how much sweat is lost in an hour maximally for those patients is 4,000. So we need to study these things. How much is the daily insensible water loss through the lungs and skin of an average healthy male? So how much is insensible loss? That was discussed earlier.
600.
Yes, 600. Okay. So those are normal changes in our fluids, but now we come with disturbances in fluid balance. First is volume, then composition, and then concentration. But we start first with volume. For volume, we have volume deficits. The amount of water is low. Okay? For acute lowness, when you have very hypovolemia, you would encounter the following. For acute cases of hypovolemia, such as massive blood loss in an accident or blood loss in a stab wound patient, you would have cardiovascular and CNS signs. Cardiovascular is when you have tachycardia so that the body can circulate the remaining amount of blood, and also low blood pressure because the blood cannot maintain the pressure it has inside your blood vessels, and also CNS signs because of poor circulation. You would have, sometimes it would just start with irritability up to the point of loss of consciousness and severe loss of consciousness, such as GCS3 patients. For chronic deficits, you would have tissue signs. Like your pedia patients, you would have decrease in skin turgor. That's why they do the pinch test, wherein the skin does not return to its proper position quickly, and sunken eyeballs for moderately dehydrated pedia patients. For your laboratories, you could request for BUN and see that it's elevated. Glomerular filtration rate would be decreased. Hemoconcentration, represented by your hematocrit and your CBC, would be high. Urine osmolality will be compared to serum osmolality, which is greater. You would have low urine sodium, but you should not request for serum sodium because it will not reflect sodium volume status. Okay? Most common cause of volume deficit in surgical patient is GI fluid loss. So the most common cause of volume deficit in surgical patients is GI fluid loss. Second lang yung blood loss. Okay? Kasi we usually, tinuro naman ni Dr. Bernal, we try to have very good control of bleeding. But for GI fluid losses, sometimes you cannot do anything about it, such as vomiting of the patient, diarrhea, NGT suctioning for obstructed patients, wherein we insert the NGT through the nose to the stomach. And then, as you can see in the table below, if you suction all of that, you would have a deficit of 1,000 to 2,000 ml per 24 hours. Okay? So GI fluid losses and also sequestration. Loss of water for it because it travels to other tissues, such as soft tissue injuries, wherein there is edema in the soft tissue of the area, burns, wherein there is no more protective covering or keratin in your skin, so that you would have more evaporation and more insensible fluid loss to the skin. Peritonitis, obstruction, and prolonged surgery all causes edema in the bowels, which lead to third spacing or moving out of water from where they're supposed to be. This is the composition of GI secretions also. So this table is very important. But rather than having you study the electrolyte contents, let's just study the volume because it's much more important. So if you have a small intestine enterocutaneous fistula wherein there is an opening of the small bowel in your skin and there is no more connection between the small intestine and the colon, you would have 2,000 to 3,000 fluid loss, water loss in a day. Okay? If you have a problem with your biliary tree and it is exteriorized by your after surgery with the use of T-tubes, you would have a deficit of 300 to 800 cc per 24 hours, which you should replace as the doctor through IV fluids or oral intake if the patient can tolerate that. Okay, so if you have hypovolemia, you also have hypervolemia, wherein there is volume excess. Usually it's iatrogenic through drinking of a lot of fluids. Secondary to renal dysfunction, wherein your kidney cannot excrete the water that it's supposed to excrete, around 1,500 per day. And also congestive heart failure, wherein there is poor circulation on your venous side because your heart cannot circulate the blood properly because of congestion, and also cirrhosis, which damages the liver. Both plasma and interstitial volume is increased, as highlighted with renal dialysis patients, wherein you see them with puffy eyes and also edema of the legs because they can no longer secrete their water. Their kidneys have ceased functioning so that the water is in the plasma and in the interstitial fluid. Symptoms are pulmonary or cardiovascular. Cardiovascular would have high BP, poor wound healing in places where there is poor circulation, and also pulmonary, wherein the patient would have difficulty of breathing because there is too much water in their lungs. That is what you hear for patients who have kidney problems. They would say, magdadialysis po kasi may tubig na po sa baga. Okay? That's pulmonary edema. That's cause of volume excess. Okay, these are signs and symptoms of volume disturbances or volume deficit. For generalized, we have weight loss. Volume excess, of course, weight gain. Volume deficit is really easy to remember. So you have tachycardia for proper distribution of the remaining blood volume. You would have hypotension or orthostatic hypotension, wherein the vessels could no longer regulate the remaining blood to have adequate circulation, and collapsed neck veins. Okay, you would also have oliguria or azotemia because you can no longer excrete. There is no longer water for the kidney to excrete, and also ileus from the GIT. Okay, so opposite of that, you would have weight gain, peripheral edema, increased cardiac output, distended neck veins, bowel edema, and pulmonary edema. Okay, so let's see what findings can be expected on a patient who was not given enough fluid replacement during surgery. So if you're not given enough fluid replacement, you would have hypovolemia or volume deficit. Which of the following is a sign of volume deficit?
Oliguria.
Oliguria. Okay, very good. Okay, the others are sign of volume excess. What is the earliest sign of volume overload? It's weight gain. Okay, it's a very important. We usually weigh our patients to know if we are giving more hydration than necessary. especially while they are on NPO or if bawal namin sila pakain. What is the common cause of volume deficit in surgical patients? So as I said earlier, with the NGT, vomiting and diarrhea.
Gastrointestinal po.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So aside from volume, we also have problems in concentration. Okay. Concentration when it comes to the location of water based on following its solute content. So the number one cation extracellularly is sodium. So water usually follows sodium. Sometimes we have dilutional hyponatremia caused by increased intake, increased AADH or antidiuretic hormone in post-operative patients, especially neurosurgical patients, antipsychotics, tricyclic antidepressants, angiotensin ACE inhibitors, and usually physical signs are absent, but your laboratory would show a low hematocrit in your CBC. You would have normal hemoglobin, but your hematocrit would show low cells per volume. Depletional hyponatremia is when you have low volume and also low sodium. It is caused by decreased intake or increased loss of sodium-containing fluids, low sodium diet, use of enteral feeds, and GI losses. So this is what we see usually in surgery. They have depletional hyponatremia. Their sodium is low, but their volume is also low. Sometimes you have cases wherein the volume is normal, but we have low sodium. This is for untreated hyperglycemia mannitol administration and extreme elevation in plasma lipids and proteins. Okay, now we have hypernatremia, wherein there is more sodium, and we have also three classifications wherein there's too much water, normal water, or low water. For hypervolemia, where there's volume excess, there's also hypernatremia caused by iatrogenic administration of sodium-containing fluids. So those of you who had medtech or nursing as their pre-med, you know that IV fluid administration is very important when it comes to drops per minute or the amount per day, because this is usually the problem. We increase the volume and increase the sodium content of the blood just by giving excessive IVF or intravenous fluids. Also by sodium bicarbonate. For those with mineralocorticoid excess, such as patients with hyperaldosteronism and Cushing's syndrome, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, usually with labs, we see urine sodium of greater than 20 milliequivalents per liter, and urine osmolality is greater than 300 milliosmoles per liter. So these are the others. Normal volume but high salt, high sodium. We have diabetes insipidus, diuretic use, because some diuretics are sodium sparing and just releases water, and other renal diseases. For hypovolemic hypernatremia, we have urine sodium that's less than 20 milliequivalents per liter, urine osmolality less than 300 milliosmoles per liter, contrasting that to hypervolemic hypernatremia. And also, we see this in tracheostomies during hyperventilation. So we monitor patient with a tracheostomy and a ventilator because, as was said, you can only lose water through your lungs, not the electrolytes. So you lose water but retain the sodium during hyperventilation in a mechanical ventilator when you have difficulty of breathing. So hypertonic glucose solutions and peritoneal dialysis. We also know that because we have high solute content in the patients having dialysis that is given to them. And yun, this is a summary of everything. So sometimes we study that by studying the etiology of each. However, we would see that some etiologies are unique to others, such as high volume hypernatremia would have its etiology as mineralocorticoid excess, aldosteronism, Cushing's disease, and congenital adrenal hyperplasia. If we study renal loss, we could see that renal loss is almost on all types of concentration problems, right? So during exams, we see these kinds of questions. Which of the following is a cause of high volume hypernatremia? So it could be Cushing syndrome, it could be hyperaldosteronism, congenital adrenal hyperplasia. For diabetes insipidus, we could see also this table, right? We would look for them. It is seen in normal and low volume hypernatremia. Okay, these are the effects and clinical manifestations of both problems in concentration. So these are tables that we need to study for this chapter. For other disturbances in fluid balance, we come to composition, or how many electrolytes are there. Usually the most important electrolytes in surgery are potassium, calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium. So let's start with potassium. Potassium is usually average daily intake is 50 to 100. It is excreted primarily in the urine. It is maintained by renal excretion. 2% of total body potassium is in the extracellular fluid. Majority is in the intracellular compartments. It is critical to cardiac and neuromuscular function. Okay? An increase in potassium would make your muscles and cardiac muscles more excitable. However, it would slow down neural transmission. So, mas may effect siya dun sa mga autonomic system natin like your heart, which is magiging excitable, and also your GI, which has its own neural control, which you would have vomiting or diarrhea. Okay? And also, you would have problems with increase in potassium if you have intracellular distribution leaking out to your extracellular compartment, such as in these cases, surgical stress, injury, acidosis, and tissue catabolism. Hyperkalemia is increase in potassium in the blood. It is defined as serum potassium above the normal range of 3.5 to 5 milliequivalents per liter. These are its causes, usually excessive intake, increased release, like what I was saying earlier, when there is a shift to the extracellular fluid of your intracellular potassium. It is usually seen in acidosis, rapid rise of osmolality in hyperglycemia, and IV mannitol. Okay? There is also impaired excretion wherein you cannot excrete the excessive potassium caused by potassium-sparing antibiotics by the name themselves, ACE inhibitors, and NSAIDs. Symptoms would include nausea, vomiting, intestinal colic, and diarrhea. That's why we said potassium is important in smooth muscle like your cardiac and intestinal muscles. For neuromuscular, we have decrease in neural transmission. That's why you have weakness, ascending paralysis, and respiratory failure. We also see ECG changes. For all of these electrolytes, we will see ECG changes, which are very important. For like hyperkalemia would have prolonged PR interval and peak T waves and arrhythmia. But the most important is that hyperkalemia becomes life-threatening because it has ventricular fibrillation, or wherein your heart is not pumping correctly but is pumping fast. That's why we have defibrillators for emergency cases. So yun yung pinipigilan ng defibrillator, yung clear na ginaganon, for ventricular fibrillation. Hypokalemia, of course, is the opposite. It's below the normal range of 3.5 to 5.0. It's more common because it is usually just a result of poor, inadequate intake or excessive excretion. You usually lose potassium also with GI losses, diarrhea, fistulas, vomiting, high NGT output, and intracellular shifts, such as in insulin therapy, because sugar binds to potassium, and then when you give um, insulin therapy, the sugar would come inside the cell, taking with it potassium. So that's why it's one of the strategies for correcting hyperkalemia. We give sugar and then we give insulin. For hypokalemia, symptoms would be failure of normal contractility of GI smooth muscle, skeletal muscle, and cardiac muscle. Since it's very common and we have a lot of it, a lot of GI losses in surgery, we often see ileus as a post-operative complication. Because mababa nga yung potassium, and sabi natin, potassium yung nagko-control ng smooth muscles, we will have ileus or the non-movement of your small bowel. That's why in common knowledge with other people, they say, pagkatapos mo maoperahan, hinihintay mo ng umutot or passing of flatus bago i-feed. Kasi we often encounter ileus, the bowel stops moving because of hypokalemia. We want to see that the air swallowed by the patient or the air swallowed while talking would be passed as flatus before we can say that the bowel is already moving. Okay? There would also be ECG changes, which you should remember. Okay, these are the summary of your etiologies. And these are sample questions on how to deal with the exam. So what is the normal range of serum potassium?
3.5 to 5.0.
Okay, thank you. Thank you sa mga sumasagot. What is the most common clinical manifestation of hypokalemia in post-operative patients?
Release.
Okay, thank you. Okay, another one is calcium. It is distributed in three forms. There's protein-bound, there's complex to phosphate and other anions, and there's ionized calcium, which we usually request because it is for neurotransmitter stability and it can be measured directly. Daily intake of calcium should be 1 to 3 grams per day. It is excreted in the bowel, and calcium balance is through complex hormonal control. As we all know, we have the parathyroids and also the thyroids, which controls the levels of calcium in our blood and which calcium should be reabsorbed by the bone. It is controlled by our parathyroid glands. Is serum calcium below 8.5 milliequivalents per liter, ionized calcium below 4.2 milligrams per deciliter. It is usually seen in pancreatitis, wherein the necrotic tissue caused by the released enzymes in your pancreas intra-abdominally would cause inflammation of your fats, your chelated by your calcium with your free fatty acids. There's also through massive soft tissue infection, renal failure, pancreatic and small bowel fistulas, and as I said, it is controlled by your with your parathyroid. So hypoparathyroidism would lead to hypocalcemia. There's also a thing as transient hypocalcemia. Okay? It is not removal of the parathyroid. We see this usually through the necrosis or atrophy of the remaining parathyroid gland after thyroid surgery, because the thyroid gland and the parathyroid gland, as we all know, are very intimate and would share the same blood supply. So affecting the blood supply during surgery would sometimes cause atrophy of some of the glands until the patient would recover. Okay, you would have transient hypocalcemia. It's one of the things that we monitor after we do thyroidectomies in our patients. Others that cause hypocalcemia is malignancies with increased osteoblastic activity, such as breast cancer and prostate cancer, wherein there are masses growing on your spine or other parts of the bone, which would get the calcium from the blood. so that you would have low calcium in your blood, but increased bone density, or increase the density of calcium in the mass that's metastatic to through breast cancer and prostate cancer. Okay? These are other causes: toxic shock syndrome, tumor lysis syndrome, and massive blood transfusions. That's why we give calcium after giving around 3 units of blood to some of our patients. These are signs of neuromuscular and cardiac symptoms brought about by hypocalcemia. So with the drawing, you can see what you can see is Bostek's sign, wherein you tap the face of the patient and the lip would twitch, and also Trousseau sign, wherein when you place a BP cuff on the arm of the patient and increase it slowly, there would be carpopedal spasms, which is like this, which is like a cramps of your intrinsic muscles of the hand, which is a very clear sign of hypocalcemia. Okay, so it could be given as a question like this: what sign can be elicited in a post-thyroidectomy patient experiencing hypocalcemia? So as was said, it could be done with Bostek sign or Trousseau sign. For phosphorus, it is the primarily intracellular divalent anion. It is abundant in metabolically active cells. It is involved in ATP production in glycolysis. And serum phosphate is controlled by renal excretion. Hyperphosphatemia is caused by decreased urinary excretion, increased intake, and endogenous mobilization. Usually, these are the common problems naman with all the electrolytes. You have more if you cannot excrete it through your kidneys, when you have a lot of intake of the said electrolyte, or when it mobilizes away from its usual location. Okay? Such as, this is an intracellular anion, but when you have cell destruction, like tumor lysis syndrome, wherein the tumor grows so big that there is no more blood supply to it, the phosphates, the phosphorus will be released back into the blood when there is necrosis of the tumor. And also in rhabdomyolysis, wherein there is destruction of muscle tissue, hemolysis, destruction of blood tissues, and also in hypothermia and hyperthermia, wherein there is death caused by extremes of temperature in your body. Hypophosphatemia happens when there is increased urinary excretion. Again, sinasabi na naman natin, it's either urinary excretion you may problem, intake you may problem. So if you have low phosphate, you have probably problem with your intake, and also the shifting away from extracellular to intracellular compartments. Okay, so just need to study that. For magnesium, normal dietary intake is 20 milliequivalents per day, primarily found intracellularly. 1/2 of the total body content is found in bone. 1/3 is usually bound to albumin, and it is excreted both in feces and urine. And the kidney has the ability to conserve magnesium. Hypermagnesemia, so again, renal problem. Magnesium-containing antacids like Kremil S, aluminum and magnesium hydroxide ang generic ng Kremil S, and also yung TUMS. So again, it's about intake. You have more magnesium because there's more intake. And also, again, there's mobilization from intracellular to extracellular, such as massive trauma, thermal injury, severe acidosis. Okay? So there are also ECG changes associated with it. For hypomagnesemia, again, for intake, excessive renal excretion, and losses. For magnesium, what's important is that its symptoms is similar to calcium deficiency. You would have muscle tremors, hyperactive reflexes, Chvostek sign and Trousseau sign. And it can lead to hypocalcemia and persistent hypokalemia. So sometimes as doctors, we often test for more common causes of electrolyte imbalance. When we see a patient with Swartzberg, we would assume that the patient has low calcium and request for a test for ionized calcium. However, when we get a low result, we correct it, but we cannot remove the symptoms. Sometimes it is good to check also for your magnesium, because it can cause to persistent hypocalcemia and hypokalemia if hypomagnesemia is not corrected. Okay, these are a summary of symptoms. So again, sinasabi natin, ang pinaka-importante which can cause death is hypo and hyperkalemia. Right? So this is a example question. A patient who had massive transfusion developed carpopedal spasms. 2 grams of calcium gluconate was given intravenously. However, the patient still continued to experience carpopedal spasms, but not accompanied by paresthesias of the face. What is the next step in the management?
Check for hypomagnesemia.
Yes. Okay. So we don't just continue correcting calcium. We need to check for magnesium. Okay. We now look at how to correct them. We know that sometimes electrolytes are low or high, hyper, hypo, kalemia, natremia, phosphatemia, magnesemia, calcemia. So for hypernatremia, we compute for the water deficit, and then we provide, if the patient can tolerate oral fluid intake, we would give water, or in IV, we would give hypotonic fluid to increase the volume of the fluid and not increase the number of sodium. But rapid correction can lead to cerebral edema and herniation. Okay, because of the rapid shift of your solute and solvent and osmosis. For hyponatremia, we usually just restrict water intake of a patient. If severe, we also add sodium or just simply salt to the diet. And neurologic symptoms are usually present if already below 120 milliequivalents per liter, because it's 135 to 145 in normal. 3% normal saline solution should be given. Okay, but rapid correction again can lead to pontine myelinolysis. Okay, for your hyperkalemia, this is how we correct. We can remove through oral medications and dialysis. We could shift the potassium intracellularly by giving sugar and then insulin a few minutes after, so that the potassium that binds to glucose goes inside the cells. And we could also give bicarbonate 1 ampule. But if we cannot correct that quickly, we can protect the patient from arrhythmia or sudden arrest by giving calcium gluconate 5 to 10 ml in 10% solution. For hypokalemia, what's important to know is that when we give 10 milliequivalents per hour, when we give more than that, we should have an ECG monitoring already, because potassium is very dangerous to your heart. It might go very high. So in an unmonitored setting, such as a patient in the ward, where not in the ICU where continuous monitoring is done, we could give no more than 10 milliequivalents per hour. But we could give as high as 40 if the patient is continually monitored through ECG. Okay. Again, the following recommendations that we need to study: how many doses and how fast. Usually for symptomatic, we give 20 milliequivalents every hour for 4 doses with 1 hour rests in between. Hypercalcemia, it's already critical if calcium in our blood reaches 15 milligrams per deciliter. Initial treatment is repleting volume deficit. So increase your volume. Okay? And for hypocalcemia, we give calcium carbonate suspension or yung Caltrate Plus. A lot of calcium supplements nowadays for osteoporosis. We can give that if the patient can tolerate oral fluid or oral intake. But without enteral nutrition or oral intake, we give calcium gluconate 2 grams IV. And then as calcium. Usually, we wait until 3 days wherein there is usually normalizing already of the calcium and just the symptoms of the patient. Okay, so again, hypocalcemia would be refractory if hypomagnesemia is not corrected first. Hyperphosphatemia, we give phosphate binder phosphate and aluminum containing antacids orally. And for hypophosphatemia, this is the way to correct. Okay, sorry, talagang madami. For hypermagnesemia, we correct volume deficit, correct acidosis, and eliminate all exogenous sources. And we give calcium chloride if we cannot correct easily so that we can correct the cardiovascular effects of hypermagnesemia. And in extreme cases, we sometimes need to do hemodialysis. For hypomagnesemia, this is the way to correct them. Usually, it's just magnesium sulfate. Okay, so all of those correction of life-threatening electrolyte abnormalities we need to learn individually before the prelims. And for the last part, we are giving fluid therapy for preoperative, intraoperative, and postoperative patients. For preoperative fluid therapy, the first thing that you would learn when you go to the hospital and be the ones to do your orders is first is admit patient. Then the next order would be the diet, which is usually diet as tolerated and NPO. And the next one is fluids. So how do we compute for fluids prior to surgery or as maintenance fluids? So in a patient who is 50 kilograms, the first 10 kilograms, you should give 100 ml per kilogram per day. So automatic, 1 liter per day na yun in a 10 kilogram patient. For the next 10 kilograms, from 10 to 20, we give an additional of 50 milliliters per kilogram per day. So in a 20 kilogram patient, we add 50 times 10 again, so 1,500 ml per day. Right? And then if the patient exceeds 20 kilograms, the rest of the kilograms would just have 20 ml, additional 20 milliliters per day. Okay, so computing, when you give me a 40 kilogram patient, I already subtract 20 and that would be 1,500 liters per day. And then the remaining 20 would just be computed to multiplied by 20 ml, which is 400, and the patient would require 1,900 liters per day. Okay? That is for normovolemic patients seen electively. But for emergencies, usually when there is already volume deficit, such as those with cardiovascular signs already like tachycardia, hypotension, orthostatic hypotension, and also other cardiovascular signs, we already give a bolus of 1 to 2 liters of isotonic fluid early. Then followed by continuous infusion based on vital signs, urine output, and base deficit correction. So we need a urine output of 0.5 to 1 ml per kilogram per hour for the patient to know that we are infusing correctly. That's why, kunyari, again, dun sa mga nursing, yung pre-med, importante sa mga doctors, yung INO, minsan umaabot pa sa napapagalitan tayo, di ba? And also the vital signs. So we need normal vital signs. We need normotension. We need no tachycardia or bradycardia to know that we are correctly infusing the right amount of fluid. Okay? Intraoperatively, after the induction of anesthesia, compensatory mechanisms are lost. Compensatory mechanisms are heart rate, tone of your blood vessels, whether they are dilated or constricted to maintain their blood volume. So nawawala lahat yun because of the medications given. And there could be third space edema because of the injury and also the operation. However, it is a common practice that we transfuse 500 to 1 liter per hour of balanced salt solution for homeostasis of an intraoperative patient. We could give more based on the vital signs, but usually 500 to 1 liter is already okay. Post-operatively, we assess the patient's volume status by vital signs and urine output. We also project through ongoing fluid losses, like, for example, cases wherein we already place a drain, or patients who have colostomies, wherein they have output of feces and enteral contents through the skin. No? So we assess that, and after 24 to 48 hours, if we cannot resume feeding so that the patient could regulate his or her own volume, we give 5% dextrose or in 0.45 saline solution. Okay? Most problems we see is volume excess is a common problem, and the earliest sign is weight gain. Volume deficit, as I was said earlier, is tachycardia, oliguria, and orthostatic hypotension, usually. Okay? So last questions na lang. A patient with cardiovascular signs of volume deficit through blood loss such as hypotension and tachycardia was seen. How should this patient be managed? So balik natin yung slide. May volume deficit, may cardiovascular signs such as tachycardia and hypotension. What is the initial management?
Give 1 to 2 liters of
Ayun.
tonic.
Doc, letter A po. Ay, okay. So, a 24-year-old man is undergoing abdominal surgery for bowel obstruction secondary to post-operative adhesions. As a surgeon, you know that there is ongoing extracellular fluid loss secondary to bowel edema, peritoneal fluid, and wound edema. How much fluid should be given intraoperatively? So, going back,
500 to 1 liter.
yes, 500 to 1 liter, just as long as there is no mention of problems with the patient's vital signs. Okay, a 15-kilogram child was diagnosed with appendicitis and is scheduled for surgery. How much fluid should be given pre-operatively for this patient? Yun, 15 kilograms, no? Tapos, pakitingnan yan.
One 1,500 ml per day.
Um, Actually, no. That's for 20 kilograms because the first 10 kilograms would be given 100 ml per day, di ba? So, first 10 yun. So, 10 times 10, 1,000 na yun. The second 10 should be given 50 kilograms, ay 50 ml per day. Pero hindi naman siya umabot ng 20 kilograms. 5 kilograms lang. So, magiging 5 times 20. 5 times 50. So, 250. 1,250 per day. Okay? Okay, next question. Commercial daw. Gustong sumilip nung pusa ko. Habang sinasagot nyo na yan. No? O, doon ka na. Doon ka na. What is the fluid requirement of a 70 kilogram female who is being prepared pre-operatively?
2.5 daw.
Wait lang. Okay. Thank you. Congratulations. Because the first 10 would be 1,000. The second 10 up to 20 would be 500. So 1,500 na agad yon. The remainder would be 50, di ba? Niles na natin yung first 20 kilograms. You have 50 kilograms and that 50 kilograms would amount to 20 ml per kilogram. So 20 times 50 is 1,000. You would have a total of 2.5 liters per day. Okay? So, yung chapter na to is just 16 pages sa Schwartz. Malaki ang font ng Schwartz and marami rin siyang drawing. So, 16 pages lang siya. Please read. No? There are a lot more things there. And also, syempre, para malaman nyo yung context ng entire lecture, you should read. But for now, you should also stick to the points that were highlighted. Okay? So you'd have a very pleasant experience on your exam. Okay? So 2:30 na.